Before the eye opened, there was darkness. And in that darkness, humanity groped for meaning, a scattered consciousness seeking the light. The Eye of Horus, now etched into the minds of mystics and scientists alike, was not simply a symbol of ancient Egypt. It was the memory of sight itself, the awakening of divine perception in a world still shrouded in mystery. To understand this eye, one must step back into the riverbanks of eternity, where the Nile flowed like a celestial artery, mirroring the Milky Way above. The Egyptians did not separate heaven and earth. They saw the sky as an extension of the sacred river, and the river as a reflection of the divine. Everything flowed in correspondence. Every movement of the stars had its echo in the pulse of the human soul. It was in this harmony between heaven and earth that the story of Horus emerged, the falcon-headed god whose eye would become one of the most enduring symbols of all time. But to call Horus merely a god of war or kingship is to miss the depth of what he represented. Horus was vision itself, consciousness rising after chaos, the triumph of divine awareness over the blindness of shadow. Long before the eye became a protective amulet carved on tombs and temples, it was a living myth born from conflict, the eternal battle between light and darkness, order and disorder, awareness and ignorance. The story begins with his father, Osiris, the green-skinned god of life and fertility, betrayed by his brother Set, the embodiment of desert and chaos. When Set dismembered Osiris and scattered his body across Egypt, it was Isis, the faithful consort, who reassembled him, teaching humanity the first mystery of resurrection and devotion. But it was Horus, their divine child, who inherited the mission to restore balance. His life was not merely an act of vengeance, it was an allegory of the restoration of order to the cosmos, the reuniting of the fragmented soul. Each time the Nile rose to flood the plains, Egyptians saw in it the tears of Isis and the blood of Horus, the eternal rhythm of destruction and renewal. When Horus confronted Set in battle, the struggle shook the heavens. Legends say their war lasted for decades, gods and men alike watching as light and shadow wrestled for dominion. During one of these battles, Set struck Horus and tore out his left eye, the moon eye, symbolizing intuition and inner sight. In retaliation, Horus tore away Set's testicles, stripping chaos of its generative power. But rather than gloat in victory, Horus did something profound. He offered his wounded eye to Osiris, restoring his father's spirit in the underworld. This act, the sacrifice of vision for resurrection, became the eternal symbol of healing, wholeness, and wisdom. The Eye of Horus, or Wedjat, was not merely an image of power. It was the story of perception redeemed through compassion. It represented the restoration of what was broken, the triumph of awareness over blindness. Every fraction of the Eye of Horus corresponded to a sacred measure, forming a mathematical system that symbolized completeness. The Egyptians divided it into 6 parts: smell, sight, thought, hearing, taste, and touch, each linked to a sense, each representing a fraction of the whole. In this geometry, they saw not mere symbolism, but a reflection of the divine order of the universe, a harmony between spirit and mathematics, between myth and measure. To wear the eye was not superstition. It was to carry the promise that nothing truly perishes. What is torn apart can be made whole again. What is lost to darkness can be restored to light. And yet, the Eye of Horus was far older than Egypt itself. Across the ancient world, the motif of the divine eye, the all-seeing gaze, appears in countless civilizations, each telling a fragment of the same cosmic story. In Sumer, the goddess Inanna was described as she who sees with the eyes of heaven. In Mesopotamia, the god Shamash watched over justice through his radiant eyes that pierced all deception. In Greece, Apollo was the sun's gaze, illuminating truth and banishing shadow. In Hindu traditions, the third eye of Shiva represented the inner flame of enlightenment that burns illusion away. The eye, therefore, was not a singular creation but a recurring revelation, humanity's intuitive recognition that consciousness itself is divine. Every culture that spoke of a watchful eye was, in essence, speaking about the same mystery. The awakening of awareness, the realization that to see is to know, and to know is to create. For the Egyptians, this knowing gaze was embodied in Horus, but also reflected in the eyes of Ra, the sun god. The Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus were 2 aspects of one truth, one blazing with solar power, the other shimmering with lunar wisdom. The 2 eyes of the sky were the 2 halves of creation, masculine and feminine, active and receptive, logic and intuition. Together they formed the complete vision of the cosmos. The priests of Heliopolis taught that when the sun set each day, Ra descended into the underworld, where he faced the serpent of chaos, Apep. It was through the guidance of the eye, the celestial vision, that he found his way back to dawn. Thus, every sunrise was a resurrection, and every opening of the human eye a miniature creation of the world. The eye became not just an emblem of protection, but a key to immortality. Tombs were adorned with its shape, mummies wrapped with its amulets, and temples aligned so that the first rays of the morning sun fell upon its carved form. The Egyptians believed that through the eye, the soul could see its path through the afterlife, guarded from deception and shadow. To modern eyes, this might seem poetic myth, but for the ancient mind, myth was not fantasy. It was the highest form of truth, the language of the eternal speaking through symbols. The Eye of Horus was a living idea, a geometry of divinity expressing how the universe itself perceives and heals. Even today, its shape endures, on pendants, architecture, and digital icons. The same ancient gaze that once adorned the temples of Edfu and Dendera. It looks out from our world of screens as if reminding us, the true eye is not what sees outwardly, but what awakens within. What, then, did the ancients truly mean when they spoke of the eye as whole? What is this completeness that transcends time and death? To answer that, we must dive deeper into the spiritual mathematics of Egypt, where geometry was theology, and numbers themselves carried divine breath. In the next part, we will explore how the Eye of Horus became not only a symbol of restoration but the blueprint of consciousness, the sacred equation of human awareness encoded within myth. The Eye of Horus is often seen today as a mere ornament, a design found on jewelry, tattoos, or temple walls. Yet to the ancient initiates of Egypt, it was the most sacred diagram ever drawn. To them, every curve, every line, every fraction of the eye encoded the structure of perception itself, the pattern through which the human soul experiences reality. To truly understand the eye, one must imagine how the priests of Egypt thought. Their world was not divided between matter and spirit, science and religion, geometry and faith. To them, number was divine, and form was revelation. They believed that creation followed a geometric logic, that every living thing, every sound, every movement of the stars could be expressed as a proportion, a sacred rhythm in the eternal dance of order. The Eye of Horus, or Wedjat, embodied that divine mathematics. When Horus's eye was torn apart in his battle with Set, the god Thoth, master of wisdom and writing, reassembled it. But Thoth did not simply heal the eye, he restored its proportions. Each part of the eye, when measured, represented a fraction that together formed almost but not quite the number 1. The total was 63/64. To the Egyptians, that missing fraction, the tiny sliver that made the eye incomplete, symbolized the mystery of the unseen. It was the piece that belonged only to the gods. Humans could approach perfection, but never possess it fully. Thus, the Eye of Horus became both a symbol of wholeness and a reminder of humility before the divine. Each fraction of the eye corresponded to one of the human senses, and by extension to one dimension of human consciousness. One half was the eye itself, sight, the power of observation. 1/4 represented hearing, the capacity to receive vibration. 1/8 symbolized thought, the power of mental reflection. 1/16 was smell, the invisible essence that enters the breath. 1/32 corresponded to taste, the union of substance and perception. 1/64, the smallest measure, was touch, the intimate point of contact between self and world. Together, they formed the totality of human experience. The eye, then, was not just a symbol of divine protection. It was a map of consciousness. It showed that knowledge arises from the union of all senses, all perceptions, all fragments of awareness rejoined into one seeing whole. Thoth's restoration of the eye carried a hidden message. Perception itself is sacred. When we see truly, when the fragments of sense are united by wisdom, we participate in the divine act of creation. To see with clarity is to heal the world. This was no poetic metaphor to the Egyptians. It was metaphysics. They believed that the human act of seeing was an echo of the God's act of shaping the cosmos. To see was to bring order from chaos, to define boundaries, to call the undefined into form. And so, every person was, in a small way, a mirror of Horus, the god who restores sight, who brings back light where it was lost. But the eye also carried a more esoteric meaning, one that reached into the hidden chambers of the Egyptian temples. There, initiates learned that the eye was not only a symbol of outer perception, but of inner illumination. It represented the awakening of the inner sight, what later traditions would call the third eye. When the priests spoke of the left and right eyes of Horus, they referred not merely to the sun and moon, but to the two hemispheres of consciousness. The solar right eye of reason, clarity, and law, and the lunar left eye of intuition, mystery, and dream. The balanced awakening of both eyes, reason and intuition, science and spirit, was considered the path to divine vision. Thus, when Horus lost his left eye, it symbolized humanity's fall into partial vision, the dominance of outer seeing over inner knowing. And when Thoth restored it, it represented the reunion of the two worlds, the restoration of cosmic balance. This understanding of dual sight, one outward, one inward, did not remain confined to Egypt. The concept echoed through later civilizations, disguised beneath new myths and names. The Hindu sages spoke of Shiva's third eye, the inner flame that annihilates ignorance. The Greeks described Apollo, whose radiant eye pierced the veil of darkness, as the bringer of truth and prophecy. And in the Hebrew tradition, the eye of God that sees all things became the eternal witness of creation. It is as if, through every age, humanity kept rediscovering the same truth, that the eye is not only an organ of vision, but a metaphor for consciousness itself. It is the bridge between the visible and the invisible, the seen and the unseen, the mortal and the divine. For the Egyptian initiate, this idea was embodied in ritual. Within the temple, the image of the eye was drawn on sacred papyri, carved into altars, or traced in the air with incense smoke. Priests believed that the symbol itself, when properly visualized and pronounced through ancient sound formulas, could awaken higher awareness. The eye was not just to be looked at, it was to be experienced. The ritual of restoration, often enacted during festivals of Horus and Osiris, symbolized the rejoining of body and soul. The high priest would present the eye to the statue of Osiris, intoning words of renewal. May your sight be restored, may your soul be whole. In this act, the eye became a living conduit between the worlds, the resurrected vision of the cosmos itself. Outside the temples, the eye became the most recognizable emblem of protection in daily life. Sailors painted it on the prows of their boats to see through storms. Mothers hung it above cradles to guard their children. Farmers wore it on amulets to protect their harvest. The people of Egypt believed that to carry the eye was to carry divine attention, that the gods themselves watched through it, guiding and protecting the righteous. This deep belief in the watchful eye eventually spread far beyond the Nile. When traders and travelers carried Egyptian art and relics across the Mediterranean, the eye appeared in Phoenician talismans, Greek pottery, and even early Hebrew amulets. In each culture, it adapted yet retained its essence, the symbol of divine vision watching over humanity. But something extraordinary happened as the centuries passed. The eye began to merge with the idea of the all-seeing divine mind. The Greeks, influenced by Egyptian mysticism, developed the notion of the nous, the universal intelligence that perceives and orders the cosmos. Later, early philosophers and mystics saw in the eye of Horus a metaphor for the logos, the divine reason that holds the universe together. In mystery schools from Alexandria to Eleusis, initiates learned that the true eye was not an external symbol, but an inner awakening. To open the eye meant to perceive the world as the gods do, not through separation, but through unity. The soul that sees through the eye of Horus no longer divides light and dark, life and death, self and other. It perceives the eternal order that moves beneath all change. And yet, the eye had another layer still, one hidden in the mathematical precision of its design. The Egyptians did not choose fractions at random. Each segment of the eye corresponded not only to a sense but to the powers of the brain. The one half, symbolizing sight, was associated with the right hemisphere. The 1/4, hearing, with the left. The 1/8, thought, represented the prefrontal mind. The geometry of the eye mirrored the human nervous system, an ancient intuition of what science would only later rediscover. In this sense, The eye of Horus anticipated what modern neuroscientists now describe as the integration of perception. It showed that the senses, though distinct, form one holistic awareness, that consciousness itself is a unifying field. The Egyptians expressed this through myth and geometry. We express it through science and language. But the truth is the same. The universe sees through us. To them, the eye was not simply divine. It was divinity seeing itself. The gods were not external beings watching from the sky, but symbols of cosmic principles reflected in the human soul. Horus was not just a deity with a falcon's head. He was the archetype of awakened perception, the human spirit rising from blindness into wisdom. Every temple wall that bore the eye reminded initiates of that truth, that within each person sleeps a fragment of the divine vision, a spark of Horus waiting to awaken. When the soul learns to see not through fear, but through clarity and compassion, it restores the eye within itself. That was the true initiation of Egypt. Not the worship of idols, but the awakening of consciousness through symbol. The eye was the mirror of the soul. To know it was to know oneself. And in the next part we will follow how this ancient symbol of perception, born from myth and geometry, began its long journey through time, transforming across civilizations. From Egypt to Greece, from the mystery temples of the Mediterranean to the secret societies of later ages, the eye would reappear, carrying its silent message through the centuries. That awareness is divine, and that to see truly is to awaken. Symbols are immortal. They do not die when civilizations fall. They migrate, like seeds carried by the wind, taking root in new soil, clothed in new language, yet preserving the same silent essence. The eye of Horus was one such traveler, a sacred vision that outlived the temples of Egypt, sailing across empires and centuries, always reappearing where humanity sought to understand the mystery of awareness. When the golden age of Egypt began to wane, and foreign dynasties rose over the Nile, the priests who once guarded the ancient mysteries found their wisdom scattered across the Mediterranean world. Their temples were no longer the centers of divine order but fading echoes of a once cosmic vision. Yet symbols have endurance beyond stone, and the eye survived not through monuments but through memory. Carried by scholars, mystics, and travelers who translated the sacred language of the Nile into new tongues. The first to inherit its light were the Greeks, whose thinkers saw in Egypt the mother of wisdom. Herodotus himself called Egypt the cradle of all philosophy. Pythagoras, according to ancient accounts, studied under the priests of Heliopolis, learning that geometry was not merely mathematics but a reflection of divine harmony. When he returned to Greece, he brought with him the Egyptian principle that number is sacred, and with it, the deeper understanding of the eye as the measure of the soul. For the Greeks, vision was the highest of the senses, the bridge between human reason and divine order. The god Apollo, the radiant archer of truth, became their Horus, the bringer of light who dispels illusion. His epithet, Phoebus, meant the shining one, and his oracle at Delphi declared, "Know thyself, and thou shalt know the gods." These words could have been spoken in an Egyptian temple. For to know oneself was to awaken the inner eye, to perceive with clarity the divine pattern that underlies existence. In Greek mystery schools, the image of the eye within a triangle of light began to appear, an emblem of illumination, balance, and divine proportion. It was not yet the eye of providence of later centuries, but the seed of that idea was already growing. The ancient philosophers saw that all knowledge begins with seeing, not just physical sight, but noesis, the inner act of intellectual vision. To them, the eye symbolized nous, the divine mind that perceives and orders the cosmos. From Egypt's Horus to Greece's Apollo, from the Wedjat to the eye of the mind, the symbol evolved, but its message remained. To see truly is to align with divine order. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in the 4th century BCE, he did not erase her symbols. He merged them. In the newly founded city of Alexandria, the greatest library of the ancient world rose beside temples where Greek and Egyptian gods stood side by side. Here, Horus was identified with Apollo, Thoth with Hermes, and Isis with Demeter. The Hermetic tradition was born, a sacred synthesis that would shape philosophy and mysticism for millennia. In Hermetic writings, the eye of Horus found new form. The text spoke of a divine vision called nous, the eye of the heart, through which the initiate perceives the unity of all things. He who sees with this eye, says the Hermetica, sees God everywhere. It was no longer about the falcon god or the physical symbol. It was about awakening consciousness itself. The eye had become the very faculty of enlightenment. But as the centuries turned and new empires rose, the symbol kept traveling. When Rome absorbed the Mediterranean world, it absorbed its symbols too. Egyptian amulets were traded in Roman markets. The eye appeared on rings and mosaics, often accompanied by serpents, wings, or the sun disk. It became associated with divine guardianship, used by soldiers, sailors, and statesmen. To wear the eye was to invoke protection from the gods of vision and fate. Even when the old religions gave way to new faiths, the symbol did not vanish. Early Christians, though cautious about pagan imagery, recognized in the eye a metaphor for divine omniscience. The Gospel of Matthew spoke of the single eye through which the body is filled with light, a phrase that resonated with Hermetic and Egyptian imagery alike. In medieval manuscripts, illuminators sometimes painted a radiant eye in the heavens, the watchful gaze of God, both protector and witness. Thus, the eye of Horus was reborn as the eye of providence, the all-seeing eye of divine wisdom. It appeared not as a pagan remnant, but as a universal emblem of spiritual truth, that the divine perceives all, that nothing is hidden from the light of awareness. Though its meaning was recast in the language of faith, its roots still reached deep into the Nile soil. The pagan eye had become a sacred symbol of divine vision. But there was another lineage, more hidden, more esoteric, through which the eye's deeper meaning was preserved. In the secret traditions of alchemy, Kabbalah, and mystery schools, the eye was not simply a symbol of God watching man, but of man awakening to the divine within himself. The alchemists of medieval Egypt and later Europe, drawing upon Hermetic texts, described the eye as the mirror of the soul. To polish this mirror was to refine perception, to see reality as it truly is, not as the senses distort it. In alchemical art, one often finds a radiant eye emerging from clouds or flames, surrounded by the motto lux est omnia, light is all. It represented the inner awakening of consciousness, the philosopher's illumination, the moment when the seeker perceives unity behind the veil of appearances. This was the mystical continuation of Horus's restored vision, the eternal return of the eye. During the Renaissance, as ancient texts were rediscovered, the symbol flourished again. Scholars who studied the Hermetica saw in the eye the universal key to knowledge. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci drew eyes with geometric perfection, studying the proportions that reflected divine order. To Leonardo, the eye was the window of the soul, echoing the same wisdom spoken in Egyptian temples 3,000 years earlier. Even the architects of sacred geometry, from cathedral builders to secret societies, adopted the symbol. The eye became the mark of enlightenment, the emblem of those who sought to see beyond the veil. Within circles of philosophers and mystics, it came to represent the unbroken chain of wisdom passed down from the priests of Heliopolis to the keepers of the inner mysteries. Yet, as with all symbols, its meaning could shift with the consciousness of those who beheld it. Where one person saw divinity, another saw power. Where one saw illumination, another saw control. The eye, capable of representing both protection and surveillance, became a mirror for the human soul, revealing what one believed about the nature of the divine. Was the eye watching to judge or to guide, to dominate or to enlighten? The answer depended on the heart of the beholder. Through the Enlightenment and into the modern world, the eye resurfaced again and again, on coins, emblems, and architecture. Most famously, it appeared atop a radiant pyramid on the Great Seal of the United States, accompanied by the Latin words annuit coeptis. He has favored our undertakings. This image, later printed on the $1 bill, linked the eye not to any secret order, but to a much older idea, that the nation's destiny was overseen by divine providence. It was the eye of God blessing human vision, the continuation of the same archetype that had watched over pharaohs and mystics alike. And yet, beneath these layers of politics and culture, the true essence of the eye of Horus persisted. Quiet, timeless, unchanged. Whether drawn in temple stone, painted on parchment, or engraved in currency, it remained the same eternal symbol, the divine act of perception. It is the reminder that all creation begins with sight, that the world exists because consciousness looks upon it. But there is another, deeper current still, one that flows beneath the surface of history. In esoteric teachings that survived within secret initiatory traditions, the eye was not only about perception but about creation through awareness. The Egyptians believed that to see was to bring something into being. When the gods opened their eyes, the universe unfolded. Light itself was the gaze of the divine awakening. To understand this is to glimpse the hidden power of the eye, not merely to witness reality but to shape it. In that ancient worldview, the act of seeing and the act of creating were one and the same. The eye of Horus was the symbol of divine imagination, the force through which the invisible becomes visible, the formless given form. In later mystical philosophy, this idea was refined into the principle that consciousness is the ground of all existence. The universe does not merely exist independent of awareness. It unfolds through it. The eye of Horus, then, was humanity's earliest attempt to express this metaphysical truth, that the cosmos is a living field of perception, and that we, as fragments of divine consciousness, participate in its unfolding. Thus, the eye's journey from temple to manuscript to modern icon was not a decline but an evolution, an adaptation to each age's understanding of the sacred. Beneath every reinterpretation lay the same eternal message. To awaken one's inner sight is to align oneself with the divine order of creation. And so, even today, when the eye appears in art, architecture, or popular imagination, it is more than decoration. It is a calling, an ancient whisper from the dawn of civilization, reminding humanity of its oldest truth, that to see with clarity, one must first purify the soul. The eye of Horus is the eternal symbol of that purification, the restoration of wholeness to a fragmented vision. In the next part, we will descend into the inner chambers of Egyptian initiation, exploring how the eye was used not only as a symbol but as a spiritual technology, a method through which the soul could experience illumination and the mortal could perceive the divine. In the world of the ancients, temples were not places of worship as we know them today. They were laboratories of the soul. To cross their threshold was to step out of time and into the eternal. Within those sacred halls, the myth of the Eye of Horus was not merely told, it was lived. The initiate did not learn about gods. He became their living symbol, undergoing the same trials, death, and rebirth that defined the eternal drama of light and shadow. Deep within the sanctuaries of Egypt, in Heliopolis, Abydos, Dendra, and Edfu, the priests guarded what they called the mystery of the eye. To the uninitiated, the eye carved on temple walls was a symbol of protection, but to those who walked the inner path, it was the map of a journey, a spiritual anatomy of awakening. Before an initiate could approach the inner chambers, he underwent purification. For 40 days he fasted, abstained from worldly pleasures, and studied the hymns of Thoth and Ra. This period was known as the closing of the eyes, a symbolic blindness. It represented the state of ordinary humanity, asleep within the dream of the world, seeing only shadows. The initiate learned that what we call vision is often illusion, shaped by desire, fear, and ignorance. Only when the eyes are closed to illusion can the inner sight begin to open. When the time came, the initiate was led by torchlight into the temple's inner sanctum, a corridor of silence, lined with hieroglyphs that told the story of the soul's descent and resurrection. The air was thick with incense, and the walls shimmered with gold and lapis. Here, the priests recited the litany of Horus, invoking the divine falcon to guide the soul through darkness. At the center of the chamber stood the image of Osiris, god of resurrection. Before him, on an altar of alabaster, rested a golden eye, the Wedjat, surrounded by sacred offerings. The initiate was instructed to kneel, to fix his gaze upon the eye, and to contemplate its meaning. He was told, "This is your eye. You are Horus who lost it, and Horus who finds it again." What followed was no mere ritual, but a psychological ordeal, a confrontation with the unseen forces within. As the priests extinguished the torches, darkness fell, and the initiate was left alone with the symbol. He would fast and meditate through the night, reciting invocations from the Book of Coming Forth by Day, also known as the Book of the Dead. These texts were not funerary manuals, as modern scholars once believed. They were manuals of initiation, guides for the living to awaken the divine eye within. In that darkness, the initiate's own fears and memories would rise before him. Visions, sounds, and whispers that mirrored the mythic battle between Horus and Set. The priests taught that Set was not merely an external god of chaos, but the shadow within every human being, the blindness, anger, and pride that tear perception apart. To defeat Set was to conquer the self. The tearing of Horus's eye symbolized this inner struggle, when the soul's vision is wounded by its own ignorance. When the initiate could endure the visions without fear, when he could witness even the darkness without turning away, the priests would open the inner chamber once more, revealing the altar bathed in light. The high priest would say, "Horus has found his eye." A sacred anointing followed, often with oils blended from lotus, frankincense, and myrrh, symbols of purification and eternal life. The initiate's forehead was marked with a golden pigment in the shape of the eye, placed between the brows, the site of the inner eye. This was the moment of illumination, when the initiate understood that the eye of Horus was not an external charm, but the eye of consciousness itself, reborn through trial. He had become the restored eye, a living bridge between the human and the divine. The priests described this awakening as the opening of the eye of Horus, and it was the heart of Egyptian initiation. It marked the transition from outer religion to inner knowing, from belief to direct perception. The initiate emerged from the temple not as a worshipper, but as a seer, one who had gazed into the invisible and returned with vision intact. The hieroglyph of the eye was then inscribed beside the initiate's name on sacred papyrus, signifying his rebirth. It was believed that from that moment onward, his consciousness was aligned with the divine order of Ma'at, the cosmic balance of truth, harmony, and justice that sustains the universe. To see with the eye of Horus was to see as the gods see, not in fragments but in wholeness. This transformation was not unique to Egypt. Across the ancient world, similar initiatory experiences unfolded in temples and mystery schools. In Greece, initiates of Eleusis underwent symbolic death and resurrection in darkness, emerging with eyes open to the eternal. In Persia, followers of Mithras experienced the same passage through shadow to light. In India, the Upanishadic sages described enlightenment as the awakening of the eye of wisdom. Everywhere, humanity sought to recover the lost eye, the inner sight that perceives truth beyond illusion. But Egypt gave this process its most vivid form. In the myth of Horus and Set, the battle for the eye became the archetype of all inner struggle, the eternal conflict between awareness and ignorance. The restoration of the eye by Thoth symbolized the redemption of the human mind through wisdom, language, and balance. In essence, it was the myth of consciousness itself, wounded by duality, healed by knowledge. Within the deeper layers of Egyptian cosmology, the eye was also the symbol of the heart. The ancients did not separate heart and mind. To them, the heart was the seat of intelligence, the organ of divine perception. During the weighing of the heart ceremony in the afterlife, the heart was balanced against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was pure, the soul could see clearly, its vision unobstructed. Thus, to restore the eye was to purify the heart, for only a heart free of falsehood could reflect divine truth. This is why, in Egyptian art, the eye often appears alongside the heart or the feather, symbols of clarity and justice. The initiate learned that perception is a moral act. One cannot see truth if one's heart is clouded by deceit or greed. To awaken the eye was not simply to gain knowledge, it was to become worthy of knowledge. In the royal mysteries, this initiation was also linked to kingship. Pharaohs were considered embodiments of Horus, and their coronation was described as the opening of the two eyes. The right eye represented the solar power of Ra, authority, clarity, and action. The left eye, the lunar wisdom of Thoth, intuition, mercy, and understanding. A true ruler, like a true initiate, must keep both eyes open, seeing not only the world's surface but its invisible harmony. The coronation rituals of the pharaoh thus reenacted the restoration of Horus's eye. The priests placed the eye symbol upon the crown and chanted, "May the eye be whole in you. May Horus live in your sight." The pharaoh's ability to rule justly depended on his capacity to see rightly, to balance power with wisdom, action with reflection. This idea would echo through later civilizations. The Greeks spoke of the vision of kings, the ability to perceive the order of things. The early mystics of the Near East described divine rulers as those whose eyes had been opened by the heavens. Even in modern times, the association of vision with leadership endures. The phrase visionary still implies one who sees beyond the ordinary. All of it traces back to the ancient mystery of the eye. In the initiatory path, The eye also became the mirror of immortality. The Egyptians believed that to awaken the eye was to free oneself from the cycle of decay. For ordinary souls, death was a passage through confusion. The soul wandered through shadow, blinded by its own ignorance. But for the initiate, death was merely a transformation of perception. With the eye restored, the soul could navigate the underworld with perfect clarity, recognizing illusion for what it was. Thus, the eye was placed upon sarcophagi not as decoration, but as a beacon. It guided the soul through the afterlife as surely as the sun guided the day. The deceased who carried the symbol of the eye was said to have the sight of Horus, the divine awareness that transcends death. This is why, even after millennia, the eye of Horus remains one of the most enduring symbols on earth. It speaks to something universal, the longing of the human spirit to awaken, to see through illusion, to restore the unity of vision lost in the chaos of life. Whether drawn in gold on a pharaoh's tomb or worn today as a pendant, it carries the same message. Wholeness is not found by avoiding darkness, but by seeing through it. And so, the mystery of the eye endures, a timeless invitation to look beyond the surface of things and perceive the sacred order that lies beneath. In the next part, we will follow this mystery beyond the walls of Egypt, into the esoteric traditions that inherited its wisdom. From Hermetic circles in Alexandria to mystical philosophies that shaped later spiritual thought. There, the eye will reveal a new dimension, the bridge between human consciousness and the divine mind itself. After the last pharaohs had fallen, and the temples of Egypt began to sink beneath the sand, the eye did not close. It traveled, silently, invisibly, through minds that still remembered. When the torches of the old priesthood were extinguished, the flame of the eye was carried into a new world, the world of secret schools, hidden manuscripts, and initiates who sought wisdom not from temples, but from the silence of the soul. In the city of Alexandria, where Greek philosophy met Egyptian mysticism, a new current of thought was born, Hermeticism. The name came from Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, a fusion of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. Both were patrons of language, intellect, and hidden knowledge, the divine scribes who wrote reality itself. The Hermetic texts taught that the cosmos was a living mind, and that man was its mirror. As above, so below, as within, so without. To the Hermetic initiates, the eye of Horus symbolized the mind's awakening to its divine origin. It was no longer only the eye of the god, it was the eye of every human being who remembered what they truly were. The tearing of the eye by Set represented the fragmentation of consciousness, when man forgets his source and becomes lost in matter. The restoration of the eye was the act of remembering, the inner alchemy that unites spirit and flesh once again. In one Hermetic fragment, the disciple asks Hermes, "How shall I see the truth?" And Hermes answers, "Close the eyes of your flesh, that you may open the eye of your mind. The eye of the heart sees what the world hides." This idea would echo through centuries, from the mystics of Alexandria to the Sufi poets, from Gnostics to medieval alchemists, all inherited in one form or another the wisdom of the eye. The Gnostics, those early seekers of divine knowledge, believed that every soul was a spark trapped in illusion. The physical world, what they called the veil of matter, blinded humanity to its origin in the divine fullness, the pleroma. The eye of Horus became a secret metaphor in their texts, representing the gnosis, the moment of inner illumination when the soul remembers itself. They saw in the myth of Horus and Set the eternal conflict between spiritual sight and material blindness. To restore the eye was to awaken the gnosis within. Centuries later, when the Roman Empire absorbed Egypt, the temples of Isis and Horus transformed into mystery cults that spread throughout the Mediterranean. Roman initiates wore amulets of the eye not only for protection but as reminders of a promise, that within each person lay the potential to become divine through vision, wisdom, and discipline. When Christianity emerged, it did not entirely erase these ideas. It transmuted them. The eye that sees all became a symbol of divine providence, and saints were described as those whose inner sight had been opened by grace. The biblical phrase, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light," echoes directly the Egyptian concept of the Ujjat, the single, restored eye that perceives unity. Christ's teaching, in that sense, was not alien to the old mysteries. It was a continuation under new light. "The true eye," he said, "is not of the body but of the soul." Meanwhile, far from the public faiths, another current flowed underground, the alchemists. In their hidden laboratories, they inherited the symbolism of Egypt not through temples but through symbols: gold, Mercury, the sun, and the moon. The Eye of Horus became their secret code for illumination, the inner sight that allows the alchemist to see the invisible structure of the world. When they drew the all-seeing eye within the triangle of fire, they were not depicting surveillance, they were depicting consciousness observing itself. The triangle represented the trinity of body, soul, and spirit. The eye within it was the philosopher's vision, the awareness capable of perceiving transformation as divine art. For the alchemist, the tearing of Horus's eye mirrored the chaos of the Nigredo, the blackening stage of despair and dissolution when all certainties die. The restoration of the eye was the albedo, the whitening, when the purified mind perceives the divine order beneath all matter. And finally, the eye shining in gold represented the rubedo, the final illumination, the moment when the human soul becomes one with the cosmic light. Every flask, every crucible, every fire in the alchemist's lab was a metaphor for this same process. The restoration of the eye, the awakening of the hidden God within. Through the Middle Ages, the eye reappeared in cathedrals carved in stone. Gothic architecture, rising like frozen prayers, encoded sacred geometry that mirrored Egyptian proportion. The oculus above the altars, the circular stained glass windows, represented the divine eye of light entering the temple of matter. The builders, many of them belonging to secret brotherhoods, continued to hide the old symbol in plain sight. The Templars, rumored inheritors of Eastern wisdom, used the eye in their cryptic seals and in the geometry of their churches. They saw it as the mark of vigilance, the watchfulness of the awakened soul. When the Templars were destroyed, their symbols scattered but survived, resurfacing centuries later in the Rosicrucian and Masonic traditions. By the time of the Renaissance, the eye had become the emblem of the Homo Universalis, the universal man who unites science and spirit. Leonardo da Vinci, obsessed with perception, called the eye the window of the soul. In his sketches, one can see echoes of Egyptian proportion. The eye of Horus mirrored in the anatomy of the human skull. For Leonardo, to understand vision was to understand creation itself. The eye, he wrote, embraces the beauty of the world, and through it, the soul rejoices in divine order. The Masonic lodges that flourished in the 17th and 18th centuries would later adopt the symbol of the all-seeing eye, directly descended from the Eye of Horus, though now encased in Enlightenment philosophy. For the Masons, the eye symbolized reason illuminated by divine truth, the inner compass guiding men toward moral and intellectual perfection. The light radiating from it represented wisdom, and its position above the unfinished pyramid echoed the ancient idea that the eye sits at the summit of creation, the crown of the initiated mind. It is no coincidence that this same symbol appears on the Great Seal of the United States, floating above the pyramid with the Latin words annuit coeptis. He has favored our undertakings. The Founding Fathers, many of whom were influenced by Freemasonry and Enlightenment Hermeticism, saw in the eye a representation of providence, the divine intelligence overseeing human destiny. Yet beneath the political surface, the symbol carried an older whisper, that man must rise, stone by stone, toward illumination. Over time, the eye began to split in meaning. To the spiritually literate, it remained a symbol of awakening. To the masses, it became a charm, a superstition, a logo. In the modern world, the Eye of Horus has been both venerated and feared, used by mystics, artists, secret societies, and even conspiracy theorists. But the symbol itself is innocent. It does not control, it reveals. It does not watch, it reflects. Those who misunderstand it project their own shadows upon it, the same blindness that Set once brought upon Horus. Yet for those who look deeper, the eye continues to speak. It whispers of a forgotten heritage, that to see truly is the highest form of worship. The ancients believed that perception itself was sacred, for through it the divine experiences its own creation. When a human being awakens the eye within, they do not merely become wise, they become a participant in the cosmos self-awareness. Modern psychology, without realizing it, rediscovered the same truth. Carl Jung, in his study of symbols, wrote that the inner eye represents the integration of consciousness, the point where light and shadow unite into wholeness. He saw in alchemy, and by extension in Egyptian myth, the drama of individuation, where the self becomes complete through confrontation with the unconscious. The eye of Horus, in Jungian language, is the self, the totality that transcends duality. Thus, what began as myth became metaphysics, then psychology. The same symbol that once adorned temple walls now mirrors the inner landscape of the human mind. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, that ancient Egypt, in its divine simplicity, already knew what our modern sciences are still discovering, that consciousness creates reality, and that the eye of Horus was the first map of that truth. Its geometry is not mere art. It encodes proportion, mathematics, and the golden ratio, the same principles that govern both the human brain and the spiral of galaxies. To open the eye, therefore, is not only a spiritual act but a cosmic one. It is to align perception with the harmony that sustains all forms. It is to become the bridge between microcosm and macrocosm, to see through the illusion of separation. That is why every civilization that inherited the Egyptian wisdom placed the eye at the summit of its sacred architecture. Whether in pyramids, cathedrals, or domes, it is the reminder that the purpose of life is to ascend toward awareness, to climb the pyramid of existence until we stand beneath the open sky of consciousness itself. The true initiate in any age is not one who possesses secret knowledge, but one who sees with a restored eye, who perceives the divine in every grain of sand, in every motion of time. He understands that awakening is not escape but return, not leaving the world behind, but seeing it for what it truly is, a living image of the eternal mind. And so, from the tombs of Egypt to the symbols on our modern currencies, from temple carvings to digital screens, the eye continues to gaze back at us, patient, timeless, waiting for us to remember. Because the eye is not the God's eye watching humanity. It is humanity's eye remembering its divinity. In the next part, we will uncover how this symbol became a psychological and philosophical key to self-mastery, shaping the doctrines of power, discipline, and consciousness in the modern age. From Nietzsche to occultism, from secret orders to the psychology of will, the eye will reveal its final form, not as ornament or relic, but as the mirror of the awakened mind. As the modern world rose from the ruins of empires, the temples turned to dust, and gods were reduced to symbols. Yet the eye did not vanish. It retreated into the only temple that could never be destroyed, the human mind. For thousands of years, the eye of Horus had represented divine order restored through awareness. But now, in the age of science and psychology, it began to reappear in another language, that of consciousness itself. The ancient priests of Egypt had once mapped the soul through geometry. The modern thinkers would map it through the psyche. And though they no longer spoke of gods, they spoke of the same struggle, between blindness and illumination, between chaos and meaning. In the 19th century, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche declared that God was dead, not as an act of rebellion, but as a diagnosis. Humanity had turned away from transcendence and was now lost in the void of its own making. Yet Nietzsche's solution was not despair. It was vision. Man, he wrote, is something that shall be overcome. To see clearly, to perceive reality without illusion, was the task of the Übermensch, the one who could bear the light of truth without flinching. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the ancient eye returned as the gaze of the self-aware individual, who no longer depends on external gods but becomes his own sun, the restorer of meaning in a world that has forgotten the sacred. Where Horus restored the shattered body of his father Osiris, Nietzsche's seeker restores the shattered fragments of humanity through self-overcoming. The act of seeing, of facing life with clarity and courage, becomes an act of divine creation. A century later, Carl Jung would rediscover this myth under a new name, the process of individuation. Jung saw in every myth a reflection of psychological truth. The gods, he said, were not gone. They had become archetypes, eternal images that live within the human unconscious. The eye of Horus, to Jung, would represent the self, the totality that integrates the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow. To restore the eye, in this sense, is to heal the split within the psyche. It is to recognize one's inner set, the chaos, the fear, the repressed impulses, and to transform it into strength rather than denial. Horus's victory over Set is not the destruction of darkness, but its integration. The eye does not close the night, it learns to see within it. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That sentence could have been inscribed on the temple walls of Egypt itself. For what is the eye of Horus if not the eternal symbol of light made conscious, the human ability to perceive truth even amidst shadow? In modern psychology, this vision takes on another form: the idea that perception creates reality. Quantum physicists, studying the very fabric of existence, found that the act of observation changes the behavior of matter. The observer is no longer separate from what he sees. He participates in creation. Thousands of years before this discovery, Egyptian priests already depicted the eye as the active principle of creation, the gaze of the divine shaping the world through awareness. What science calls the observer effect, the ancients called the divine vision. It is no wonder that in spiritual traditions from the east to the west, the third eye became the highest organ of truth. In Hinduism, it is the Ajna chakra, the point of insight and intuition. In Buddhism, it is the awakened consciousness that sees the impermanent nature of all things. In Egypt, the eye of Horus was this same vision, a balanced perception that unites the physical and the spiritual, the visible and the invisible. But beyond mysticism, the eye carries a deeper moral message. To see is to be responsible. In every myth, from Horus to Christ, from Odin to Shiva, the gift of vision demands a sacrifice. Horus sacrificed his eye for his father. Odin gave his own to drink from the well of wisdom. Shiva burned illusion with his inner fire. Each story teaches that insight is not given. It is earned through suffering, reflection, and the courage to face truth. This is why the ancients feared and revered the eye. To awaken, it meant to see not only the beauty of the divine, but also the darkness within oneself. To open the eye is to lose the comfort of ignorance. It is to stand naked before existence and recognize that creation and destruction, life and death, good and evil, all coexist in the same gaze. In the esoteric schools of the early 20th century, teachers such as G.I. Gurdjieff and Ouspensky spoke of this same awakening. They taught that humanity sleeps in mechanical habits, reacting rather than perceiving. Only through self-observation, through the inner act of seeing, can one awaken from this dream. The eye, in this context, becomes not a symbol of supernatural power, but the discipline of consciousness itself, the capacity to watch one's thoughts without being consumed by them. In every era, the eye has been the mark of mastery. To the Egyptians, mastery meant dominion over chaos. To the Stoics, it meant control over emotion. To the mystics, it meant awareness beyond delusion. And to the modern seeker, it means the ability to remain conscious in a world designed to distract. Our age, flooded with images, has inverted the meaning of vision. We look constantly, at screens, at symbols, at reflections, but we rarely see. The eye of Horus, reborn in this digital labyrinth, reminds us that seeing is not passive. It is creation. It is participation in the divine act of awareness. Perhaps this is the truest legacy of the symbol. Not an ancient superstition, but a forgotten discipline, the art of conscious perception. When we restore the eye, we reclaim the sacred within the ordinary. We remember that life itself is a temple, and every moment is a revelation waiting to be seen. But let us not forget the balance encoded within the eye, the harmony of opposites. In the Egyptian temples, the left eye of Horus represented the moon, intuition, and the unseen. The right eye represented the sun, reason, and clarity. Only when the two eyes worked in harmony did the god become whole. This duality mirrors the human struggle. The balance between intellect and feeling, science and spirituality, masculine and feminine energies. The restoration of the eye, therefore, is not only personal, it is civilizational. When reason loses its compassion, or faith loses its wisdom, the eye once again becomes divided, and chaos returns. The modern world stands at that threshold. Surrounded by data yet starved of meaning, humanity stares into countless artificial eyes, cameras, satellites, lenses, yet remains blind to its own soul. The eye of Horus reappears not as a relic, but as a warning. Vision without wisdom becomes surveillance. Knowledge without conscience becomes tyranny. To see without understanding is to repeat the fall of Set, power without harmony. And so the ancient lesson returns, that true sight is not control but communion. The eye sees not to dominate, but to know. And knowledge in its highest form is love, the union of perceiver and perceived, of human and divine. When one truly opens the eye of Horus within, the world ceases to be a battlefield between gods and demons. It becomes a living mirror, an unfolding consciousness reflecting itself through countless forms. Every act of creation, every thought, every breath becomes sacred. The eye does not belong to Horus alone. It belongs to every being that dares to awaken. The philosopher Plotinus, drawing from Egyptian wisdom, once wrote, "Never cease chiseling your own statue until the godly splendor of virtue shines forth in you." The eye of Horus is that chisel. It is the awareness that sculpts the soul, refining chaos into order, ignorance into wisdom, matter into meaning. To awaken it is to remember that the divine has never been absent, only unseen. The temples have fallen, but the inner sanctum remains intact. And in that temple, at the center of consciousness itself, the eye still watches, not as a guardian of the past, but as a guide to the future. In the coming continuation, we will follow how this same symbol inspired modern spiritual movements, psychological theories, and esoteric philosophies that attempt to restore meaning in a disenchanted age, and how the eye continues to serve as humanity's oldest and most powerful metaphor for awakening. In the ancient temples of Egypt, light was not merely illumination, it was revelation. Every shaft of sunlight that passed through a column, every reflection upon the sacred pools of water, carried within it the language of the divine. And at the heart of this silent dialogue between heaven and earth stood the eye of Horus, a living hieroglyph of transformation. To the priests of the sun, this eye was not a static emblem but a process. It was the story of how perception itself could be purified until the human being no longer saw with mortal eyes, but with divine sight. The ujat, or the sound eye, was the goal of all initiation, the restoration of the spiritual vision lost through ignorance, fear, and desire. The myth of Horus battling Set was therefore not only a cosmic conflict between good and evil, it was the inward struggle of consciousness. When Set tears out Horus's eye, the myth teaches that darkness can blind us, that even the noblest soul can lose its light. But when Thoth restores it, the message is clear. Wisdom heals perception. Knowledge, when aligned with truth, returns sight to the blind and harmony to the soul. This act of healing was central to Egyptian mysticism. The restored eye, often divided into 6 fractions, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, and 1/64, was not only a symbol of mathematics but of completeness. Each fraction represented one of the 6 senses of spiritual perception: thought, hearing, sight, smell, taste, and touch. The total, though slightly less than 1, reminded initiates that only through divine intervention, through the mysterious missing piece restored by Thoth, could true wholeness be achieved. Thus, the eye of Horus was not perfection. It was the journey toward perfection. It was the effort to recover that final fraction of unity, the hidden spark that connected the finite to the infinite. As centuries passed, this symbol migrated beyond the borders of Egypt. When the Greeks arrived, they saw in the eye echoes of their own mysteries: the all-seeing gaze of Zeus, the prophetic eye of Apollo, the vigilant wisdom of Athena. The Romans, inheriting this fusion, transformed it into the oculus, the watchful divine gaze that protected emperors and armies alike. But while its forms changed, its essence remained the same. The eye watched, protected, and revealed. And then came a deeper metamorphosis. The symbol of the eye began to merge with the alchemical traditions that arose in late antiquity. To the alchemists, the eye of Horus became the eye of the philosopher, the vision capable of perceiving the hidden unity behind all transformations. It was said that those who attained the eye could see the spirit within matter, the light within darkness, the divine plan within apparent chaos. This idea found its way into Hermeticism, the mystical philosophy attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a figure blending Thoth and the Greek Hermes. The Hermetic texts spoke of the eye of mind, the faculty by which humanity might perceive God through the mirror of creation. To awaken this eye was to remember the divine origin of the soul. The Emerald Tablet, one of the most famous Hermetic texts, reflects this truth in a single phrase: "That which is above is like that which is below." The eye of Horus embodied this law. It was both a celestial and a human organ, reflecting the correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm. To see truly was to see this connection, to perceive the divine order in every fragment of the world. Over time, this spiritual science of sight evolved into what we now call alchemy. But the goal was never the literal transmutation of metals. The ancient masters were clear. The true alchemy was of the soul. To turn lead into gold was to purify the self, to refine the dull, heavy consciousness of matter into the radiant awareness of spirit. And the eye was the key to that process. It was the inner lens through which the alchemist beheld his own transformation. When properly opened, it revealed that every element, earth, air, fire, water, was a symbol of internal forces, and that by harmonizing them, the initiate could achieve enlightenment. In Egyptian thought, gold was considered the flesh of the gods, a substance incorruptible, eternal, radiant like the sun. To see with the eye of Horus was to awaken that same incorruptibility within oneself, to become symbolically golden. The eye, then, was the philosopher's stone before the stone had a name. It represented the purified consciousness that could transmute suffering into wisdom, ignorance into understanding, darkness into light. Later mystics, from Gnostics to early Christian monks, preserved echoes of this vision. They spoke of the single eye through which one might perceive divine truth. The Gospel of Matthew, for instance, says, "If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light." Though expressed in another language and faith, the essence was the same. Unity of perception leads to illumination. In this way, the eye of Horus bridged civilizations. It linked the temples of Egypt to the monastic cells of the Desert Fathers, the mystery schools of Alexandria to the cathedrals of medieval Europe. Wherever it appeared, it whispered the same secret. To see the divine, one must first purify the instrument of seeing. But what happens when this eye turns outward again? When humanity, having glimpsed the divine within, seeks to manifest it in the world? That question haunted the thinkers of the Renaissance, who inherited both the Christian mystics and the Hermetic philosophers. They believed that to rebuild civilization, humanity must first recover its sacred vision, the same vision embodied by the ancient eye of Horus. In the hidden manuscripts of the Rosicrucians, the eye became a symbol of illumination, the awakening of inner wisdom that would guide a new age of harmony between science, art, and spirit. For them, the eye was not superstition, it was prophecy. It foretold a time when reason and faith, knowledge and mystery, would be reunited under a single light. That dream, however, was fragile. As modernity dawned, symbols that once carried deep metaphysical meaning became abstract emblems of power, politics, or fear. The eye of Horus, once a guide for the soul, was eventually reinterpreted by those who had forgotten its sacred origin. Yet even through distortion, its presence endured. Because the eye cannot die, it can only be misunderstood. Like the sun that sets but never ceases to shine, the eye of Horus continues to radiate from the depths of human memory. It reminds us that to see the world rightly, we must first see ourselves rightly. To know truth, we must cleanse the lens through which truth is perceived. And perhaps this is the ultimate secret of the eye, that divinity is not found in distant heavens, but reflected in the awakened vision of the human soul. When the initiate finally gazes upon the world with a restored eye, with the calm, balanced sight of Horus healed by Thoth, the illusion of separation fades. Light and darkness, life and death, above and below, all dissolve into a single living unity. And in that unity, the eye no longer observes the divine. It becomes the divine.